everybody. Welcome. We're running about 15 minutes late, but we are going to have 30 minutes for this session on the shifting sands, the new realities of geopolitics. How much you really tuned in to these realities and the speed of change. I'm Nick Gowing. I'm founder and director of the Thinking the Unthinkable project, and no unthinkables are happening at the moment. We actually slightly renamed it Unpalatable, and that's what we want to explore for the next 30 minutes. We were hoping to be joined by Benedikt Franke from the Munich Security Conference. He was unable to join us. So I'm going to read something in a moment from the Munich Security Conference report. But first of all, introducing David Petraeus, General David Petraeus, who's chairman and founder of the KKR Global Institute. He's come in specially from New York and Washington. And Carl Bildt, who was foreign minister and prime minister of Sweden, also high representative in Bosnia, and is also co-chair of the European Council on Foreign Relations. But let me, I've said to them both, we mustn't just focus on Ukraine. And that a lot of discussion has taken place in the last 36 hours here. This is about profound changes which are taking place, about whether there is order of any kind. Let me just read to you what the Munich Security Conference and the Munich Security Report said a couple of months ago, literally, in their revisioning, as they entitled it. This is about invading Ukraine. Putin has made the clash of competing visions a brutal and deathly reality. The world's liberal democracies are awakening to the challenges posed by autocratic revisionists and have taken the first important steps to push back. But for liberal democratic principles to prevail over the autocratic variants, democracies must revamp their vision of a desirable international order. So my question to both David and Carl very quickly is very clear. How much is changing and how much is really understood by the kind of corporate leaders who are sitting in this room on the change in geopolitics, David?
Well, I think everything is changing. And with great respect to the corporate leaders who are in here, I suspect that at least some of you have not yet fully grasped the significance of this change. And again, keep in mind, I do geopolitical risk for one of the largest investment firms in the world, KKR, managing over $500 billion now. We own 120 companies, minority interests in another 100. And the way we often characterize the past decade in particular, although you can certainly date it earlier than that, is that there has been a truly seismic, profound transformation of geopolitics from a world of benign globalization as little as a decade ago. And by that, I mean that global trade was going like this. Barriers to trade, investment, capital flows were gradually going down to an era of renewed great power rivalries in which the barriers to trade, investment, and capital are going up, and globalization has turned into slowbalization. Global trade is, yes, still gradually increasing, but at a vastly reduced rate compared to, say, a decade or so ago. This is very, very significant. And geopolitics now, this is something at KKR, we did geopolitical risk when we invested in the Philippines the first time, Indonesia, Vietnam, Mexico, Colombia, Chile, former Yugoslavia, Ethiopia. It's not what we did for investments in North America, Western Europe, the major economies of the Pacific Rim. It is now. And so geopolitics now has to be a central feature of the diligence process alongside, and we integrate the macroeconomic analysis variables, and then also any of the environmental, social, governance issues, along with the deal team, as we're trying to determine how that investment will go. And keep in mind that this is not about putting money to work, it's about the outcome, and it's trying to understand where is the puck going. Remember Wayne Gretzky, the greatest hockey player ever, said that his genius was not his skating ability or stick handling, it was that he had a sense of where the puck was going. We're trying to figure out where that puck is going in a world in which entities lists on China are increasing. Again, specific export controls have been imposed, all of this. And of course, alongside this, the title of this session is Shifting Sands, yet I'm not entirely comfortable with that, despite the profound transformation.
What would you call it?
Because, I mean, it's a mix. It's complex sands or something. Because again, let's look in Europe. Carl and I are regulars at the Munich Security Conference. What we have seen there in the last 2 years is the greatest unity in Europe since the end of the Cold War. And what brought that about? Of course, Vladimir Putin. He sought to make Russia great again. What he has actually done is make NATO great again. The irony of this, of course, one additional member already, Finland. I'm sure Sweden will eventually join as well. And again, the degree of unity, solidarity, is unprecedented since maybe I was a speechwriter for the Supreme Allied Commander in the final years of the Cold War. So that is actually not shifting, it's solidified. And then you look out in the Indo-Pacific region and you see something similar. After years of islands in the South China Sea, then militarizing them, wolf warrior diplomacy, we saw the latest with the ambassador to France the other day, the altercations with Indian soldiers, dozens of them killed in the line of actual control, economic coercion, all of this, you see the alliances and partnerships that we've historically had, again, being solidified. And so again, I'm a bit uncomfortable. Yes, the shifting sands are where there actually is a lot of sand, the Middle East, some of that. But even there, I don't think it's quite as profound as people make it out to be.
Let me check with Carl, if I may. Do you see stability unraveling and unraveling at a speed which is almost against the assumptions of so many people?
Well, I think it's fairly obvious. Everything is at stake. The entire world order is up for grabs.
Is there order at the moment?
Sorry?
Is there order at the moment?
Not that I can see. Have you detected any lately? No, we are. Go back. I very much agree with Sir David's description. I normally say that we went through first, from sort of the late 80s, probably the best quarter of a century for mankind ever, in terms of economic, social developments, relative absence of peace, or of war, of major wars. Then from 2008, that I put the dividing line, we entered a period of disarray and disorder. There are quite a financial, economic, political, rising geopolitical tension, and we are now in a period of profound dangers. And there are two things that we should pay attention, or a number of things we should pay attention to. Clearly, we must prevail in Ukraine. And that for Ukraine primarily, but for the global order. Because were it to happen that Mr. Putin would be seen as more or less successful after launching this particular war, and after US just walked out of Afghanistan, the effect on the credibility of not only the United States, but the combined West in the rest of the world is going to be disastrous. And that's going to have effect in every other corner of the world, notably in East Asia. So what is going on in Ukraine doesn't stay in Ukraine, to put it in those terms. It affects the entire global order. We must prevail in Ukraine. The second thing that should be said, I think, and there was some in the previous panel as well, about the global south. And they're sitting on the fence or whatever they are doing. What they are saying, I think, has a point. They say, well, we understand you care about Ukraine. We don't necessarily disagree, but we have the third largest country of Africa disintegrating or melting down at the moment. We had years of absolute horror in Yemen. We had a horrible humanitarian disaster in Tigray. We have drought all over the Horn of Africa. You don't really seem to care. So if you don't care for our problems, why should we care about yours? They have a point. We, for all of the concentration of resources, attention, policies that we now rightly have on Russia and Ukraine, I think we need to understand that we need to engage more with all of the other issues in order to retain our credibility. And that also goes for third point, really, which should not be forgotten. We have major issues of climate, major issues of global health, where we also have a potential north-south problems. I mean, what they're saying in the south, and they have a point. Say, we got the pandemic, people are dying all over the world, you grab all of the vaccines in your countries, the Americans and the Swedes and the Brits and whatever, their political leaderships, vaccines for us primarily, and you could die in Africa, we don't really care. And that is roughly what happened with vaccine distribution. So we need to win, prevent Russia from winning in Ukraine, but that's not enough. we need to restore our credibility in the global south, and we need to build global alliances to really global ones, including the Chinese, by the way, notably including the Chinese, on climate and health and those issues that are going to hit us otherwise. So it's really, if we mess this up, to sum up, if we mess this up, we are in a mess. That's sort of a rather profound statement.
The Munich Security Conference identifies a democracy-autocracy cleavage, which is affecting everything, and both of you are nodding at that point. How is that impacting where order is going, or the kind of new order which will emerge? David?
Well, it depends. You know, I taught economics in an earlier life, and you can never go wrong by starting your answer with the response, it depends, and it does depend. It depends on how Ukraine comes out. It depends on how well the U.S. continues to lead the world. Are we consistent in our voice? Is there stability in the United States? Obviously, there are questions about that. It depends on how China does in its efforts to challenge the rules-based order that we all worked so hard to establish in the wake of World War II. I think there are a number of factors, and I should just note, I would love to see what Carl advocates, which is global alliances, and there will be global alliances for certain issues possible. I do believe that's very much possible, certainly climate, certainly global health, certainly food security. There's a variety of areas, but there are also some areas where I think that will prove to be elusive. I think it's going to be very, very challenging. And a lot in the global south. I'm just back from India. I know you are as well. You were at Raisina. I was at the Trilateral Commission. And India made sure that we trilateralists heard from the global south. They invited a large number of countries from that. They still have a degree of leadership of a non-aligned movement. They still have a foot in that camp. They also still have a foot in the BRICS, as they also have a foot in the Quad. So in a way, they're almost leading this effort where they have relationships with each of the poles that are emerging. And whether you use the term New Cold War or what it is, all of which is regrettable, by the way. No one would rather see a mutually beneficial relationship between the US and the West and China than somebody who has seen multiple wars in his lifetime and sees what happens. But I'm not that confident that when it comes to the bigger issues, where we're talking about, again, security, and even increasingly economics and trade, that we're going to be able to forge those kinds of understandings. A lot depends here, especially on Beijing, and whether they are willing to even establish communications. We can't even get a trip from the United States for our Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, to go back to China after the one that was canceled because of the balloon episode. So how do you establish guardrails if no one answers the phone when the Pentagon picks up the hotline? That's challenging.
Can I press you both on, as you've both been in India, how much the strategic realities and the geopolitical realities are changing? We now know that the Indian population is now essentially bigger than China officially. But what did you pick up at the Raisina dialogues about, now I've got to be careful how I do this, but Modi has a particular kind of way of governing, and Congress is essentially nowhere in Indian politics. In other words, it's becoming quite autocratic. Now, what does that mean for us understanding where India is going with its relationship with Russia and so on? I use that as an example of what we're trying to talk about, Carl.
No, India is still the world's largest democracy, but it's been a fairly rough ride if you look at the history since 1947. Remember Indira Gandhi and the emergency where she abolished everything that was related to democracy in India for some years. So it's not been entirely smooth, but half of all the people in the world living in democracies live in India. So it's not an insignificant country, mildly speaking. They are going to go on present trends. They go from the world's 6th largest economy to the world's 3rd largest economy within a decade. Yep. That's quite something. Chinese economy is still 5-6 times the Indian economy, but still, and they're increasingly assertive on the global stage. They have the G20 this year, and they see themselves as the spokesman for the global south. Yep. I think that's, even if it could irritate us somewhat what they're saying, I think it's in our interest, because the other alternative spokesman for the global south is China. And I think we much prefer to have India there in that particular capacity than the Chinese. let me then also say on this autocracy-democracy thing, I'm still of the opinion, I think, and that sort of, I think I can have a stronger opinion on that even now after what we've seen in the last few years, that countries with hyper-centralized leadership, with people in power for too long, being too confident of their own powers, they stumble sooner or later. Putin has stumbled by his own sort of obsession with his powers and in history into war that at the end of the day will be disastrous for Russia. The centralization of power in China and the abandonment of the course that they had previously, which was somewhat different, has evidently been to the detriment of the Chinese as well, both in economic policy in terms of international standing. So I stick to the old belief that open societies and open economies, messy as they are, over time are the ones that are going to do much better.
David, picking up again on
Yep.
India, if I can,
Sure.
because I'm using that not
Yep.
as a distraction,
Sure,
but an
no.
indication of how our eyes may not be on it sufficiently at the moment.
Yeah.
I think some eyes are on it. I can tell you that KKR's eyes are on it. We're the biggest investor, I believe, of our type and have been there for a number of years, so we were a bit ahead of the curve. India is now the fastest growing large economy in the world. It just surpassed UK actually in GDP, quite a significant gain. And in their words, these are their words, not mine, India has been transitioning from diffidence to confidence, and they really are taking their place on the world stage. In many respects, again, as a representative, a convener of the Global South, but also just as India. I remember one time when you know Foreign Minister, Minister of External Affairs, Jaishankar, very well. Between his time as Foreign Secretary and his current position when he was at Tata Group, we were on stage together, and I said, you know, it's time for India to choose. And he said, we have chosen India, and they have. And it's actually, that is their trajectory, and it is very, very important. It's especially important because India is one of the biggest beneficiaries from a number of dynamics surrounding supply chains, lessons of the pandemic. You know, don't have all of your manufacturing and assembly in one region of one country if it shuts down and does a zero COVID policy, because you, Apple, will not have any iPhones made for 5 long weeks, whereas Apple's new factory, it's in India. Where are a lot of other factories? It's a beneficiary of rising labor costs in China. It's a beneficiary of security concerns of manufacturing there. So again, India has a lot of dynamics going in its direction, and if it can build the infrastructure and get the various barriers to trade, the bureaucracy and so forth that have always been a challenge there, I think it is definitely a country to watch. And its position in the world will be more and more prominent, even as it is not in one camp or the other, but actually has a foot in both.
I'm circling around both of you, the idea of alliances and where something like India, someone like India, somewhere like India, is now a key player. It was always a key player in the non-aligned movement as well. But is that a new alliance which is emerging, a new fulcrum for alliances?
Let me quickly do it, and then I'll hand off to the former Prime Minister and of course, former comrade in Bosnia and so forth. Look, India is solidly in the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and is more solidly in the Quad as well. So how do you reconcile that? Again, that defines, I think, or that represents China's approach to the world.
Carl?
No, we need to get used to a world that is somewhat different. I mean, the Indians are going to be more assertive, as they should be. If they eventually are the 3rd largest economy in the world, they're going to say, listen to us somewhat more.
Yep.
The same applies also to the Chinese. I mean, the Chinese are, I forgot the figure, but I mean, if you go back slightly more than 200 years in time, they were a quarter of the global economy. And then you have the rise of the West, which in their view was based on crushing them, and the Indians would say the same. And now they are, over time, coming back to a position. I don't think they will be a quarter of the global economy. They won't. But they will be even bigger than they are today, and they will demand more of a say. And we can hope only that we can establish a reasonably working relationship with both the Chinese and the Indians, and to take the Turks, to take another somewhat difficult example, of a country that sort of sees itself as the necessity to take more space on the global stage, and we need to adjust and take that into account, but do it in ways that sort of still safeguards the values and the interests that we have. And I think our values are so strong that over time they will be the ones that are the dominant ones.
Well, let me test you both on another new reality. If we'd been meeting 2 or 3 months ago, would we be talking about the Saudi Arabians having new diplomatic relations with Iran, for example? There are massive changes going on in the Middle East. In fact, yesterday, one of the contributors referred to what's happening in the Middle East and what's happening in the Gulf as creating a new Southwest Asia. That's probably going a bit too far. But when you look at the reality of what KSA is doing and the way MBS went to Qatar to see the Saudi football team play, given that for 4 years they had literally tried to encircle the whole of Qatar, the reality and trying to factor that into geopolitical calculations and ability to foresee it. David?
Well, I think let's be realistic here. This is a reflection of the kingdom and the Emirates in particular, the Emiratis, realizing that they needed to stop the bleeding in Yemen. They tried a variety of other approaches, and they have settled on one, which is let's do some kind of rapprochement with Iran, which also has to stop the bleeding.
Are you surprised by that?
A bit, yeah, I am. But it has been happening. I mean, you've seen this evolve. The first surprise was that it was pretty clear that they were no longer going to continue to press the fight the way they were for some period of time, that the Houthis were putting up more resistance, that their approach was not working quite as well as they'd hoped with a variety of proxy forces guided by Emirati, very talented Emirati special operators and so forth. So I think that's the dynamic here. That's what's going on. There was also a recognition and a lot of encouragement from other countries, in this case the previous US administration, that you've got to mend defenses within the GCC, that this was highly counterproductive. But let's be also realistic that if something were to happen there, the forces that are on the ground, however reduced they may have been from when I had 250,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines under my command as the Central Command commander, that it still is US Central Command that is the force, the security force of choice in the Gulf. So again, yep, there's been some changes. How interesting that China was the broker, the midwife of this rapprochement. But again, this has been evolving. It wasn't a complete out of the blue. There's long been a search for how do we resolve the problems in Yemen.
But both of you, is this moving to new alliances, Carl, or is that going too far?
I don't know if it's new alliances, but it's more numerous actors that are in that particular game. I mean, go back a long period of time, the entire region was dominated by the Brits, and then it was dominated by the Americans. I'm not saying that those are gone, as David can testify to, but there are other actors, and some of them are significant. The Chinese are there in diplomatic terms. I think it's essential from the European point of view a good thing that people start talking to each other. Yeah. Because, I mean, having new wars in the Middle East, be that Iraq, or be that Yemen, or be that Iran, was fairly disastrous. We have 2% of the Swedish population coming from Iraq. Were there to be a further major war in that region, the implications for Europe will be profound. So we have a strong interest in them patching up the differences if possible. Then we should not underestimate on the KSA and Russia. They have an interest that we don't share, and that is high oil prices. Yeah. Because they both desperately need the money. And although perhaps a good thing that oil is expensive in terms of getting rid of fossil fuel.
Well, Aramco made profits of 150 billion last year.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah, yeah. But let's keep in mind, though, that who is it in Iraq, who is in Syria that is continuing to support the host nation forces or local partners in the fight against the Islamic State? It's the United States. It's quieter, but the Prime Minister of Iraq asked the U.S. to stay publicly, which is a very significant statement given the prominence of the Iranian-supported Shia militia in Iraq since the return of the Islamic State. So again, I think, yes, there are some dynamics there that are changing, but there are also some that are just very much the same, however, perhaps not as visible as traditional.
And just to add that while in the past, of course, the oil of the Middle East was going to Europe and the US, today the oil of the Middle East goes to China.
Yeah, I mean,
and that has its impact.
People overlook the fact that the U.S. is the biggest producer of both natural gas and crude oil. It's becoming rapidly one of the biggest exporters of natural gas. The only limiting factor is the liquefaction plants.
In the last 4 minutes, let me test you on what an alliance really is. Because Francois Eisberg of the IISS said yesterday, when it came to Russia and China, it's not an alliance, it's actually a partnership. In other words, is there a danger of overstating what an alliance really is, given that that's in the title of this session? David?
No, I think the alliance, the NATO alliance, again, is more unified than it has been, and that is an alliance. In the Indo-Pacific, you don't have a grand alliance like in NATO. You have bilateral alliances. Again, an alliance is one where you have an Article 5 collective self-defense. I think that's the distinguishing feature of an alliance. And we have bilateral relationships with a host of countries in the Indo-Pacific region, some of which are becoming more important than they were for many decades. So I think those are absolutely alliances. Then there are partnerships of a variety of flavors around the world as well that generally don't have that collective self-defense feature. But when it comes to Europe, again, there's been no greater gift to NATO since the end of the Cold War than Vladimir Putin.
Carl?
If you look in history, alliances that are long-term and really solid are rather seldom there. It is normally fairly shifting sands. And the pattern is that when the world moves towards some sort of major war of some sort, you normally have sands shifting even more. So the Atlantic Alliance is fairly unique in being an alliance and having been strengthened lately. The rest are of a slightly different nature. And that applies, by the way, to, I think, Russia, China. I was sort of quite taken by the Chinese readout of the conversation between Xi Jinping and Ukraine yesterday. Because the readout of that, where he says the four should, I mean, there are four shoulds and some woulds and some considerations, I mean, typical Chinese style. But the four shoulds that he started with was the UN Charter, was sovereignty, was independence, and territorial integrity that must be executed and respected.
All right.
That is a slap in the face of Mr. Putin, if they mean seriously with that.
We've got 2 minutes left, 45 seconds each. Yesterday, Richard Haass labeled what we're going through as the post-Cold War world, the president of the Council on Foreign Relations outgoing. What do you think the capacity of leadership is to understand, whether it be political or corporate, David and Carl, to handle this, to be flexible, to be nimble, and to be open-minded enough?
Well, that depends as well. Again, it depends a lot on how much stability you see in Washington, some other very important Western capitals, frankly. It depends on the stability in Greece, by the way. I mean, again, all of these, I think, are the factors. We will see stability in China. Obviously, President Xi is entering his unprecedented third five-year term. We'll see about Russia.
Carl?
No, it depends upon elections. I mean, quite frankly. I mean, we have, in this region, we have now Turkey, we have Greece. If you look at next year, we have elections all over the place. We have elections to the European Parliament, we have elections in India, we have elections in Taiwan, we have elections in Russia, if you consider that interesting. And I understand that you have something to do in the United States, where there are sort of candidates.
Started a little early, but yeah.
Candidates of different quality, if I might phrase
and
myself
age.
diplomatically, who are contesting. And all of those elections will impact upon what's happening.
But does leadership get that?
Well,
Depends who the leaders are.
it depends on who the leaders are. So
I'm talking about political and corporate.
I think corporate leaders increasingly, very much so. But again, I think it's still settling in, and there's still, I don't think, a complete recognition that you got to understand where the puck is going, not just where it is right now. Look, think of the profound changes that have taken place just in the last year, just in the United States, with export controls on chips, additions to entities list. There's going to be an outbound investment regime of some type. These are very significant, and they have an enormous impact, not just on your ability to invest, but on the potential outcome of an investment.
And the Inflation Reduction Act. And the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah, all of these together.
You can see we're at 0, 0, 0. You have a meeting, David. Thank you both very much indeed, David Petraeus and Carl Bildt. Thank you.
Privilege. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.